Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to the February 25th, 2019 Board of Commissioners Special Called Meeting and Work Session. And we have four work session items today. And at this work session, there'll be no motions, no votes, and order concerning information as presented. So the first one today, Michael Hughes has the dais for a presentation on the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners, County Manager, and I'm just going to introduce the primary speaker. As you know, periodically, the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority provides you with an update as it relates to activities associated with the Six Flags redevelopment bond. This afternoon, we have Mr. Doug Stoner, who's the chairman of the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority, here to provide this update for you. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. Good to see Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Glad to be here. Just real quickly, as was stated every year under our IGA with the county, as it relates to the IGA with the bond issuance that we did, we do an annual report to y'all. And so this year, I'm here again to do that. I know we have one new commissioner, obviously, and we're going to be meeting tomorrow, matter of fact, to delve more into detail about what the SCRA is and its background. But you'll get a little bit of that today, but also as a refresher for some of the commissioners and the chairman of how we all got started. So the background very quickly is the SCRA background is originally was created by legislative enactment in 1982 as the South Cobb Development Authority. Actually, at that time, Senator Barnes was actually his piece of legislation. And in 2011, while I was still serving in the Senate, I redefined the act, working with the County Commission, in Senate Bill 266, to name it the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority and to expand its boundaries, as you see there in the map in the green. And so basically, very quick shorthand, it's everything south of the east-west connector, east of Austell Road as the boundary, except for wherever the city of Austell extends beyond Austell Road. And the eastern boundary is the city limits of Smyrna, and obviously down to the county line with Douglas and Fulton County. Obviously, our mission statement works to assure the long-term economic stability of South Cobb by promoting quality development, encouraging job creation, supporting public-private partnerships, and assuring that the values of South Cobb are enhanced by creating a great place to live, work, play, invest, and do business. The authority is made up of 7 members. 4 of those members are appointed by the Board of Commissioners. In fact, I think y'all have been notified. We've had one of your appointments have resigned, and so we're looking for a new appointment to the board. We have 3 appointed by the local Cobb delegation. To be more specific about that, those are members of the Cobb delegation who actually have a piece of the jurisdictional area of the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority, who actually appoint 3 members, and then, of course, our terms are 4 years and staggered. We've had an IGA with Cobb County government all the way back at 2012, where the authority was asked to spearhead the South Cobb implementation strategy for South Cobb, and that was updated in 2017, and we also did an updated IGA to continue in that purpose on behalf of the county, Cobb County. If you go to the next slide. I don't have control here, do I? Do you have it? Yeah, okay. So the South Cobb implementation strategy, as a reminder, is a balanced methodology for implementing the necessary projects to improve Southern Cobb. Guide for future actions that serves as the primary basis for preserving, protecting, and enhancing South Cobb's existing assets, while simultaneously transferring the area's liabilities into strengths. Obviously, as I said, it was updated in 2017, adopted by the commissioners, and again, we were requested to spearhead that implementation strategy in the sense in 2017 also, which we agreed to do. Very quickly, past and current projects. One of our first projects was working with the County Commission in the creation of the Six Flags Special Service District, and the reason for that was to come up with a way to fund the bonds. And as we always like to say at the time, was the individuals or the folks who are benefiting from the improvements in the Six Flags Special Service District are paying the freight. So it's not everybody in Cobb County, it's just the folks in the district. Our second, as part of that, the South Cobb implementation strategy, it had targeted that corridor, and specifically the Magnolia Crossings apartments was one of the identified properties to be removed and remediated. And so that was the reason for the creation of the Special Service District, was on that, particularly under the SCIS. The second, and just real quickly on that, In talking with the property owners down there that were going to be assessed the additional millage, they also had some other issues that they wanted to address, which had to do with beautification of the I-20 interchange and also concerning signage issues. So later on, we also did a South Cobb Marketing and Branding Initiative, was something which the county actually paid for but asked us to lead, which was done, and I'll get on that in a little bit. As I mentioned, the I-20 interchange gateway beautification there at Riverside Parkway and Six Flags Parkway, acquisition of 39 acres, Yancey property adjoining the Magnolia Crossing property. That was identified in the SCIS, but was actually not one of our original projects under the bond agreement we had with the county. And then finally, the monument and wayfinding signage pilot at I-20 interchange, Riverside Parkway and Six Flags. This just give you a quick idea of the size of where the district is located, the Special Service District. It includes, I should say, actually 230, well, still 237 properties. It was technically 238 when we added the Yancey property. No owner-occupied property. It's all commercial residential. Obviously, the district was created and adopted by the BOC in October of 2014. Working with the property owners down there, we looked at 3.5 mils on real property to support eventually a $10 million bond package that was issued by the SCRA. So the Special Service District millage was adopted in July 2015, and we simultaneously issued the $10 million bond package in 2015 also. I'll go through these individual projects real quickly and where we're at. Magnolia Crossing Apartments, we purchased just right at or under 12.5 acres for $3.7 million in October of 2015. Remember, we issued the bonds in July of 2015, so we quickly moved on to acquiring the properties. That's a photo of what was Magnolia Crossing originally. As part of the tenant relocation, we did a refund of security deposits. We also decided to do cash incentives for early move-out, anywhere from $750 to $1,000. From March to June, because at the end of March is when pretty much everyone had moved off the property, 2016, we began demolition. And as you can see there, we went through removal, obviously, of the buildings, utility infrastructure, and also putting in basically soil control, silt fences and things like that. And since that time, we have been maintaining that property in the sense of cutting the grass and keeping it in good shape, being a good neighbor. The other situation was we obviously, when we finished within less than 1 year of buying the property was ready to put on the market. So we bought the property on October 15th, 2015, officially, and it was done and remediated and ready to put on the market when we did on October 14th of 2016. So in under literally a year is when all this occurred. And from that start, we've obviously been offering memorandum that we've been promoting in the redevelopment community concerning the original 12.5 acres. If you go to the next slide, while we were doing that, we were asked by the county on a South Cobb Marketing and Branding Initiative that the county itself put up the money, about $100,000, if I remember my numbers correctly. And we were asked to kind of oversee that, and y'all selected the consultant, Slant Media, at the time. And we did that as one of our duties and went through and looking at a rebrand, create entity and sense of place, refute negative misperceptions, encourage economic development, promote area assets and events. Part of that was coming up with a specific logo and brand name, and that's what you see up there, South Cobb, welcoming communities, endless opportunities. It was also a good exercise for everybody to go through to kind of understand how people's perceptions were, not just in the community, but outside of the community. And I thought that was a good piece of information for both for the Board of Commissioners and for the people in the community to understand how we're looked at from outside of South Cobb. And these are, like I said, how we went about it and who was involved: the Cobb Chamber, Cobb Travel and Tourism, Georgia Power, Marietta Board of Lights and Water, Six Flags Over Georgia. We did surveys, polls, public meetings. And of course, this was predominantly done by Slant Media that y'all had selected to do the process, and we oversaw that. After that, one of our other projects was the I-20 Interchange Gateway beautification at Riverside Parkway and Six Flags Parkway. And these are, if you want to know exactly, exit 47, which is Six Flags Parkway, and then Riverside Parkway, which is exit 46A and B, which, by the way, just so you know, we're working with the state to get rid of the name Six Flags Drive, which is no longer exist, but unfortunately still on the DOT sign out there on the interstate. And as you can imagine, that's not a quick process. So we are working on that because the whole road is now called Riverside Parkway. Six Flags Drive no longer exists. As you remember, we had 5 roads called Six Flags at one time down there. And working with the community, We renamed all those roads, except for the one, by the way, that actually goes to the park, Six Flags Parkway. But as I said, the property owners there really wanted us to take a look at those interchanges as part of our bond package and to enhance the beautification through landscape improvements. And so the purpose of that was setting a new standard down there in that part of the county in the sense of the beautification for those areas. So the first thing you see when you come into Cobb County off I-20 would be something that just makes a statement. And I will tell you that talking with folks I work with over in Douglas County, apparently it's gotten their attention because now they're looking at their interchanges through their SPOS program, matter of fact. So anyway, setting a new standard for beautification for the area, creating an inviting environment, welcoming tourists to Six Flags over Georgia and also to the South Cobb community. So it's just making a statement, welcome to South Cobb. Obviously, this Commissioner Cupid and Chairman Boyce came to our groundbreaking ceremony. That's an artistic rendering of the Riverside Parkway. And obviously, we also did Six Flags Parkway. And give me just 1 second. Just so you know very quickly, we were able to finally get going on that. Obviously, we were delayed somewhat by GDOT permitting issues, which is nothing unusual. We're now dealing with that on the signage. But we were able finally to get it completed as of officially as of August of this past year. As I mentioned, one item that was not really one of our initial projects, but we have a process with the county where if an additional project came up, that we could bring it to y'all's attention and move forward on that, which we did back in early 2018. What it was is there was adjoining nearly 39 acres to the Magnolia property, which is virtually landlocked except for a small sliver on Factory Shoals Road. And so we had been working with the property owners over the years. It was a local family by the name Yancey, which, by the way, no relation to the firm, absolutely none. They just happen to have the same last name, just so y'all know, and had owned the property for over 60 years. Miss Yancey, or as they would say, Mama Yancey, who was living there, 80 years old, was the only person living on the property. And we negotiated with the family and her sons about the interest in purchase of that property beginning in January of 2018. And as part of that, piece of that property, it's like I said, nearly 39 acres, but they had it in two plots, basically. 10 acres was actually where Miss Yancey lived, which was not in the district because it was owner occupied. So we asked the Board of Commissioners for expansion last April to expand the Special Service District to include Miss Yancey's 10 acres of that 39 acres, which y'all did approve, and to allow us to then purchase the property because obviously we cannot use the money outside of the Special Service District. And so in working with them in negotiations, we closed on the property in September of 2018. And since that time, we now have over 50 acres to market out there for redevelopment purposes. And if you go to the next slide, you can kind of see what we talked about. You can see our 12.42 acres, which was the Magnolia Crossing. That's the adjoining just under 38 acres roughly that it's actually more than that. That map's not correct. It's actually a little more than 38 acres. But to give you an idea, that's the property, and you see Factory Shoals, and you see Riverside Parkway. And as I said, they were somewhat landlocked from Riverside Parkway. So we now, the South Cobb Redevelopment Authority now controls all that, over 50 acres of property. And as part of that, back at the end of 2016, this Board of Commissions approved a rezoning of those two properties to a PVC, which is going to be very important in the redevelopment. You gave us 5 years to work on that, time-wise, for that zoning. Of course, at the end of the day, whoever does hopefully redevelop the property is going to have to come back to y'all directly for a site plan approval. So y'all still have a say in that matter when it does happen. You can go ahead to the next. Our current project we're working on is Monument Wayfinding Signage Pilot at I-20. This is an example of what came out of the South Cobb branding and marketing study, as you see that signage there with the logo. And that's an example of what we're working now with GDOT to put on their right-of-way, actually. And as you can tell, we're working with Denise, depending on how you want to pronounce it, sign company over in Douglasville, who has done the Braves, the Beltlines, has done a lot of these projects, does a great job. And we selected them through an RFP process. And currently, we're working with GDOT to get approval. They didn't like the initial design we put up, so they've asked us to come back, and that's what we're doing. And if you go next, this kind of shows you the sign locations at the two interchanges at Riverside Parkway and Six Flags Parkway that were identified. through when we were also doing the landscaping design. And these are examples of the additional wayfinding signage that we're going to be looking at, both on GDOT right-of-way, and also there'll be 1 or 2 on Cobb DOT right-of-way in the area also. But that's ongoing, and hopefully, once we get the final approval from GDOT, based on that, it'll probably be within 8 weeks that we'll have those signs manufactured and installed. So I'm hoping by the end of the spring that will have occurred. And you can go to the next. And this gives you a project budget breakdown, and they're showing you in the sense of what our budgets were based on the original $10 million. It's actually a little over $10 million that we ended up issuing. And what you'll see here over and over again is that we have either been at or under budget on every project. I would like to say we can claim full responsibility for that, but we also have been very fortunate as we move through the process of one being realistic in what potentially the high end of these budgets would be as we were doing this, coming up with these numbers back in 2015, working again with the Board of Commissioners on that, and working with the property owners in the area who are actually paying the millage to support the bonds. And as I said, the one project that wasn't originally listed, which is 7,000, it says 7001 Factory Shoals project, that was the Yancey property. And the only reason we were able to do that was because we had been so much under budget on the other projects that we had the money to go and see if we could, grab that property, working with the property owners. So it was a win-win for everybody that when we were under budget, still had the money. And the money can only be spent inside the district, too. So it can't be taken off. But we went through a process with the county for their approval and our board's approval to do that. And we moved quickly last year to acquire it. And currently, we have just over $1 million still available to do additional projects in the future. Again, we have to approve that, and it comes back to the county, actually comes to the county manager for final approval if we decide to use that money for another project. So again, we don't run off and just decide to spend the money. We do work with y'all to make that happen. I'll stop there. Be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Any board members have any questions? Commissioner Cupid?
No, thank you for the presentation.
You're
Just really a request for you, Erica Parrish, out there in the audience here. If we can get DOT's help to follow up with GDOT regarding the change on the name on the interstate, that's something that we've requested years back, and I've seen other names change, so I feel like this can happen. Maybe we just need to press a little bit more. Other than that, thank you, Doug. It was a good presentation.
Welcome.
Commissioner Burrow?
Very good presentation,
Well,
Doug. Thank you. Any feedback on Magnolia Crossing bites or interest of developers looking at it?
I will say this, because obviously when we have people knocking on our door, that we normally have non-disclosure agreements, as you can imagine.
Well,
Without getting in details, I will say this. Once we acquired the adjoining property, now that we have 50 acres, that close in to Atlanta, we're literally from that spot are 15 minutes to downtown Atlanta, and you're 15 minutes to the airport. So it's an ideal spot if you're thinking it from a metro region. The fact that you have 50 acres under control of one property owner, and the property, thanks to working with the Board of Commissioners, has already been approved for PVC, which is Planned Village Community, which is one of the densest mixed-use developments zonings you can do in Cobb County. And by having that already taken care of, and the ability for whoever buys the property, if they do something along those lines, and just coming straight back to y'all for site plan approval, I can tell you that after we put it back out on back out to the public, I'm trying to think of the CoStar in the sense of real estate, we had within the first week, we had an increase of, I think, 3,000 people looked at the property online, which was a dramatic jump because you have 50 acres close to downtown Atlanta near the airport. And so that's what's happened. That yes, we've had several folks have started talking to us, and they're not just kicking tires. We always had people want to talk to us, but a lot of times they're just kicking the tires and they're not serious. But so we've got some serious folks now talking to us.
and are you working with Select Cobb in the chamber
Yes, we do.
to market it to?
We work with both the Select Cobb and the Cobb Chamber, and now with with Dana over there at the Cobb Chamber. But yeah, we're also working with the state So understand that we've reached out and we work with the State Department of Economic Development directly too. And they now have got it on there with the 50 acres. So I had a feeling once we had the 50, the full 50 acres, that a lot of interest it really would go up. So that's the good news. We do have some serious interest now.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank y'all. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming today.
Okay, item number 2 is Dr. McMorris on a preliminary timeline for the 2020 SPLOST, 2022 SPLOST.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, County Manager, County Attorney, colleagues who assisted me with this. As you know, we're in the midst of our 2016 SPLOST, but in preparation for the next one, we wanted to give you just a brief overview of some of the things that's going to take place between now and the time that we're proposing to have it on a referendum. So with that, we'll get started. So late last year, the county manager asked the department heads to just start thinking about the types of projects that they wanted to include in the next SPLOST. So of course, we had a draft list, and that has already been presented to the county manager and me, and we are in the process of kind of scrubbing that list. And then after we do that, we will, of course, have a work session, and we're doing that today. So moving forward, next, we will have meetings with the Board of Commissioners, you guys, as well as the constitutional officers to go through those lists and see if what we have in mind or the staff has in mind encompasses what you would like to have take place in your district, as well as the constitutional officers. And we will do that in the next coming months, as you can see, like March and April. So just around the corner, we'll start meeting with you guys and the other constitutional officers. Then after that, we'll have a department and the constitutional officers will sit down with the county manager and go through, again, the list, scrub those things that we absolutely cannot do because of either the volume of the projects, the amount of money of the projects or whatever, so we will go from there. At that time, we will also look at notifying the municipalities, the mayors of each of the cities, to let them know we would like to schedule some time to talk with them. By statute, according to the attorney's office, we have to let them know 10 days prior, so that's why they're there. So in July, between July and September, we would like to start those meetings with the municipalities, having all the data that we've collected from you guys and the constitutional officers. We would sit down and talk with our cities about what their intentions are. In addition, as you know, staff cannot advocate, we can educate, so we will also begin to look at stakeholder groups who can help support our desire for the next SPLOST. And again, that will take place in the next few months between July and September. Come October, we would like to, again, have those stakeholder groups in place and then sit down with communications, which is Ross's team, and work through how do we begin to communicate through multiple mediums, including open houses, social media, your newsletters and those kinds of things. What's the best way to get information out? Again, information out about the SPLOST itself. We're not advocating for projects. Again, staff can't do that, but we just want to make sure that we have stakeholder groups who are well informed as we are, who can also share feedback with folk within their own communities. After that, we're thinking that most people will probably be ready to start thinking about the holidays. We will continue to do work internally, and then when we come back, early part of the first quarter of 2020, we will bring you an update on the feedback that we've received from all of those various groups, and then we will start our open houses. Again, open houses consist of things where we actually have project lists on posters. We go throughout the county, and our constituents can come and actually look and see what's on the list, ask staff questions, ask you questions. We take that information, again, under consideration. We come back, we talk to you guys about it, we tweak if we need to, and then we go back to work. Coming up in May and June, again, we get really robust with our open houses again, or to continue them in May through June. Specifically, according to the statute, we do have to adopt the resolution somewhere around in May, and then we will adopt the list and the IGAs in June, where we work with our cities. After that, We will move forward with advertising according to the statute, at least 4 weeks, one day a week for 4 weeks to make sure the public is aware of what's going on. And we will also work with the elections office on approving the ballot language. Again, that's between July and August, and no later than August, we have to have that language ready for the ballot. September, October, again, we will continue to be meeting with our stakeholders. We will continue to be updating you guys on where we are, making any changes in hopes that we will be ready for 2020 ballot November 3rd. Having said all that, I'll take some questions if you have them. And if I've missed anything, again, this is just a preliminary look at what we're planning to do between now and the time that we actually put it on the ballot.
Okay, commissioners? The only question I have is, where are we on the strategic plan?
Where are we on the strategic plan? My understanding is that the strategic plan has been completed. All of the staff have submitted their feedback. We are working with your office, Mr. Mike Murphy, and we have done an overview with him, and I believe it's back in your office.
Because we need, I mean, it's kind of hard to do this thing without some kind of a plan. And the current one we have expired, right? Or is it still valid, the current strategic plan?
The strategic plan
Then
has been updated.
we adopted one, okay?
Uh-huh.
And I thought we were revising it,
We updated it
okay?
and gave it back to Mr. Murphy in your
Okay,
office.
all right.
And so, and I believe he's done a case statement letter, but the majority of it is complete. That is not complete are just our daily operational parts of our job. That's going to be ongoing no matter what.
All right, well, we need to bring that to the board,
Sure.
okay? Because it's gonna
Okay.
have an impact on, down the road here.
Yes,
Without a
sir.
strategic plan, you can't convert that into programs. Otherwise, we're just sort of, you know, we create a wish list, not a requirements list. That's my concern.
Okay. The strategic plan, if I recall, the most part of it didn't have a lot to do with the SPLOST as much as those various departments and those things that
I
go with that. But it didn't have
concur.
anything that I recall that had anything to do with the SPLOST. So,
Well,
This was not from my recollection of getting on board after that process had begun prior to my election. This is not a document that even had much public support or public weigh-in.
Right.
So I would hate to use that to drive what public expectation may be of SPLOST projects. You know, there has been some discussion about what should be the basis of SPLOST. Do you do it for maintenance? Do you do it for things people can see, can't see? Or not necessarily maintenance, but capital projects because of lack of maintenance. But it has been a desire for me to have projects that the public can see and use. So they see their dollars going towards something that adds something meaningful to their quality of life here in Cobb. And I would hate to use the strategic plan as a litmus test for that because they did not weigh in on that.
well, the strategic plan is a broad overview. Its aspiration was what it is you want your county to look like. And so let's say that, I'm gonna try to think of an example here, that let me use it, that won't be too controversial, okay? Let's say that we want to do a project that involves, okay, let's just really go, let's say our goal is in 2040, we want to have a transportation system that fully supports autonomous vehicles, okay? I'm just using this as an example. Then we should be building an infrastructure that supports that, if that's our goal. That's what the strategic plan does. It gives you a long-term vision of what it is you're trying to do so that whenever you start programming your funding, no matter where you get the source from, it at least supports that long-term big visionary plan. That's all I'm saying.
Do you
So-
see the comprehensive plan tying into that in some ways?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Because I would lean more on that where there's public input, but I can share just even the way these plans are updated. It may not necessarily reflect ongoing or emerging interest because of just the timeline. But I mean, I see where you're going. I think there's opportunity to get that public feedback, which I think is built in this, but I think there's even opportunity for us to plan for those bigger things like what you're talking about. I just don't see how we've adequately captured that
Okay,
in some other.
well, I guess we
towns.
won't know until we see the plan.
Okay.
I think that there is some value in the strategic plan, but I think more importantly, what the county has gotten away from is identifying needs and wants. The fact of the matter is SPOS is supposed to be special purpose. It was supposed to replace bonds, and it has drifted way away from that. I mean, you know, in some regards, a project should be weighed against the fact of, would you have floated a bond for it? I mean, now I'm saying in some, not all. But the fact of the matter is that we've moved away from that, and SPOS is just like, oh, I want to have this, I want to have that, so let's put it in a SPOS. And that's how the county got into the position where O&M wasn't considered. Okay, so to me, what's more important is, and I'm assuming that this is what Jackie and staff and the county manager are working on, is staff identifying what the needs of the county are, because those have to be addressed first. You know, we spent a lot of time in the budget discussions as to what are the needs of the county. And then moving from there, we can kind of talk about, are you going to expand things, you're going to add things, but you know, the county has some basic needs that have been discussed over and over that I think have to be addressed first.
Yeah.
Sure, Commissioner Burrow?
Right, and we do have to, number one, look at O&M going in, because that's what's gotten us in trouble with this SPOS, with new construction, new buildings, and then how do you staff it? How do you maintain new parks and buildings? So, and then the things that we know we need, like additional fleet or police cars or whatever, should be put in there, because it's capital, it's one-time fees, money. So, okay, you say that the departments are working on their list now, and then it'll come to us to make some revisions, and then we'll have meetings throughout
Yes, ma'am.
for public input.
Yes, ma'am. What we typically are doing is asking the ADs to work with the department heads to look at what they think their needs are, sit down with you guys and say, okay, here's what we're thinking. Did we miss anything? Or is there anything in particular that you all would like to see take place in your own districts? So that's what the staff is doing right now, is tweaking their lists per the county manager recommendation, and then bringing it to him to look at one more time, and then sitting down with you all and saying, here's our thoughts, what do you think? And then going from there. And then we're going to go out to the constitutional officers to ask what they are envisioning for the next SPOS.
And the last SPOS, we had 24 meetings throughout the county.
Open
Public
houses.
meetings, open houses.
Yes, ma'am.
So Chairman, be prepared for more town halls towards the SPOS.
Only 20?
24.
Only 24?
That's a lot.
Jackie,
Yes,
you
sir.
mentioned something that Michael Murphy's working on something. I think the commissioners should all see if he's working on some sort of plan.
The
The
strategic
commissioners.
plan was shared at the last Board of Commissioners retreat. And so that's the document that the chairman is talking about. We will get it back out to you so that you can take another look at it. But it didn't have a lot, I just wanted to make sure we are on the same page. It didn't have a lot to do with the SPOS per se in terms of lists or projects or those kind of things. As the chairman said, that's our vision for where we want to see the county and the type of county we want to be. But it didn't get that specific into the SPOS projects per se.
Yeah, one thing, Chairman, I could say I appreciated of the last SPOS process and of your comments is for the district commissioner to be able to weigh in on their projects.
Sure.
Because there may be commissioners that sense certain needs versus wants, because what may be a need or a want in District 4 and whether or not that should even be the priority, because
Right.
there's some county needs that I think we can all look at, but when it comes time to district and looking at what's desired on the residents' level, they are looking that this is going to add some value to their quality of life. And I just hope that doesn't get lost as we look at this holistically to address some outstanding needs of the county.
That I agree, but at the same time, this is a sales tax that's charged across the county, so
I
you
don't,
can't just focus on one part
oh,
of the
no,
county.
and I don't think that's ever happened. We've had balance.
Right.
I can remember last time, we all had equitable dollars to look at things within our district, and that was an appreciated process. And again, I just hope that there is a willingness to do that here, because, you know, the county is not homogeneous in as far as what its needs are. But we do have, again, some basic functions and services of the county that cross all district lines.
Yes, ma'am. We'll be getting those lists to you as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. McMorris.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Item 3 is discussion about information regarding the implementation of the Dobbins Air Reserve-based Joint Land Use Study.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Commissioners. We're asking that you receive a presentation from the Community Development Agency concerning implementation items for the Dobbins Air Reserve-based Joint Land Use Study this afternoon. Jason Gaines, who's our Planning Division Manager, will lead that presentation.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, Commissioners, County Manager. February 2015, the Dobbins Joint Land Use Study was adopted by the Board of Commissioners. And since that time, staff has been working on implementation items. There's a litany of different categories of implementation and action items and specific items under each category. So at the conclusion of the original JLUS process, the items were prioritized, and there were 3 particular items that came out of that to pursue initially in terms of implementation. So this presentation will briefly overview the JLUS process as well as the 3 implementation items that were completed actually this past summer in August. So we'll get into that history, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions you may have at the end. Or if you have any questions as I'm going through, please feel free to interrupt me. Just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. Just a recap of the JLUS itself. Again, it was adopted by the Board of Commissioners in February of 2015. It's a program funded by the Office of Economic Adjustment from the U.S. Department of Defense that's intended to balance economic development and vitality amongst a community, a civilian community, and have that growth and economic development be compatible with adjacent military installations. Okay. Quickly, this is what a JLUS is, and this is what a JLUS is not. It is not a regulatory document or an enforceable action, but it's really just a body of information that's used to help inform decision makers in decision-making processes. Very stakeholder and public engagement oriented. A lot of public involvement went into the creation of the additional JLUS, the original JLUS, as well as that with the implementation items as well. There's a list of partners that participated in both the original JLUS and the initial implementation phase. Of course, it includes our cities, 2 of our CIDs, the base itself. We actually have staff from Dobbins here today, and thank you all for coming. Overviews the committees that were involved as well, the policy committee, which was executive level, chairman, mayors, and other high-level, high-ranking officers working out at Dobbins, as well as the advisory committee, which was staff level, consisting of staff from the county, cities, and other involved partners. We also had a Matrix Design Group. They were our consultant for both projects. Celeste was the project manager for both. She was probably more visible during the original JLUS. Patrick Small, who was our deputy project manager, and he was my primary point of contact on the implementation portion of our work. Okay. Just a brief overview of the implementation goals associated with the JLUS. I won't read those for the sake of brevity. So we had 3 distinct projects.
Jason?
Yes,
Go back one
Go back,
slide.
okay.
Yeah, I didn't do the speed reading course. Okay,
Thank you. All right. So initial phase of implementation, 3 distinct items: a vertical obstruction assessment tool, a light pollution study, and a public education and outreach program. I'll talk about each one of those individually, giving an overview of each. That work, all 3 items were funded via a $90,000 grant from the Office of Economic Adjustment, which was awarded to the county in August of 2016. It consisted of a 90-10 federal-local split, and it was awarded in 2016, and we actually delayed the contracting portion of it as we were going through a transition in our leadership in terms of our elected chairman. So we delayed issuing the contract, and just giving Chairman Boyce an opportunity to get into office and allow us to get started on that work after he was seated. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about item 1, the vertical obstruction assessment tool. For each item, we'll see an issue that was identified specifically in the JLUS document and then the recommendation. So with the obstruction tool, buildings, man-made structures, other natural elements posing safety concerns regarding flight operations. So the recommendation was to develop a digital and printed model that allows staff and any interested party to determine whether the heights of proposed structures obstruct navigable airspace. And we were able to accomplish this primarily through the use of geographic information systems, and I'll show you a couple of screenshots of what we developed here briefly. So here's our purpose and intent, which is kind of along the lines of what I just stated. And our deliverables associated with this item: the actual GIS tool, a paper map book, and then a training guide, which has been made available to our GIS staff and community development, as well as the GIS staffs at the cities of Marietta and Smyrna, who were partners with us in this effort. There are a couple of screenshots. This one's a broader look at the overall military compatibility area, as well as the clear zones and the accident potential zones. Some of that's kind of buried in there, but here's a closer look, and the color gradients represent ranges of imaginary surface heights. So what the tool allows the user to do is to click on any point, and it will spit out an exact height limit for structures within that particular imaginary surface. So what that allows the user to do is to determine a specific height that, say, for instance, I'll give you a real world example. IKEA, going up in Franklin Gateway in the city of Marietta, they are close enough to Interstate 75 in order to have a sign of a higher, not excessive height, but of a higher height than what would typically be allowed.
Can I jump in here real quick? Just a
Yes,
question, Commissioner Cupid. Remember you asked this morning on this map here, you can see, like, for example, we talked about that exception that was in there, and it's talked about certain heights, in the code change. Like, so for example, here, that location property we're looking at would have been in the yellow, which is a height of 50.1 to 250 feet.
To be honest, I appreciate the JLUS as a guide. I feel like the language in our code is a bit restrictive
Right.
in light of all that was done here. So I'm just hoping when we do modify the language that they best complement each other. We talked a little bit today, this morning's session, just to have the language to show that there's some level of discretion when you're building in those.
Right, and I remember this actually came up a few months ago in regards to a zoning application involving a single-family house off Atlanta Road. So different specifics, but the overall premise, I think, is the same in terms of trying to use the JLUS as a guide to refine the language in the code.
Yeah.
All right, so again, that real world example, and this was before the final vertical obstruction tool was completed, but the city staff asked if we could utilize the draft to determine imaginary surface limits and the approximate location of the sign that IKEA wanted to put up. So we were able to use it for that, and we were able to use it to help verify that the height that they were requesting was appropriate for its location. So that's one real world example in which this tool can be used. Okay. So a wrap up of that particular deliverable, they completed the tool map book. It's in electronic format, but it's suitable for printout. They included height contours at 12-foot intervals. So that gives you, I guess, a finer drawdown or finer dig down into what the imaginary surface heights actually are. The tool guide is complete. We have that as well as the city staffs. We conducted a training with staff from the partner entities, mostly GIS and planning staffs. That was back in April of last year. And the policy committee actually met during that same time frame and accepted the work that had been done during that time frame in April of last year. Okay. So with that, we'll move on to the light pollution study piece of it. Again, our issue identified in the JLUS document, and then recommendations or recommended actions identified in the JLUS document, which primarily consists of the adoption of a light military compatibility area, more or less taking the existing military compatibility zone and including some component that looks at different light regulations in areas where it's more troublesome as it relates to the installation's operations. Okay, so again, that's the big black box it's labeled on here as the light compatibility area, but that is the general military compatibility area. And then within that, you'll see that purple line, and that identifies areas of potential improvement in this regard. And you'll see a little bit more about that within the next couple of slides here. Okay, there's our purpose and intent. There's our table of contents, shows all the contents of the document. And then the appendices are particularly important because we've got a white paper outlining research of what's been done in other military communities when it comes to this particular topic, as well as the inclusion of a model lighting ordinance and a pattern outdoor lighting guide, which will serve staff and you all, the commissioners, in terms of making any future decisions from a policy standpoint in this regard. Okay, so this right here is just a table that kind of measures light pollution and is based on the metric of light reflectivity or radiance. And those last three categories, suburban, urban transition, city sky, inner city sky, those are the ones that are most problematic when it comes to base operations at Dobbins. And on the next slide, if you all are okay for me to proceed, you'll see that military compatibility area again, and then you'll see the color gradient. And again, you've got the purple line, which was identified as areas for potential improvement. And you'll see that the areas where the radiance is at the highest, 40 or greater, are pretty much all throughout those deeper shades of purple plum or whatever color you perceive that to be. A lot of those areas are within the city of Marietta. Some are within the city of Smyrna as well, and then a portion, of course, in unincorporated Cobb. But that's just to kind of identify the source of some of the ambient light that causes the most disruptance in this regard. Okay. There was, as part of this, there was an assessment of land use and lighting. Concluded that a lot of the light pollution is a function of land use and lighting of transportation corridors. As you all know, a lot of our community revitalization and economic revitalization efforts involve a lot of pedestrian enhancements in terms of infrastructure, as well as lighting, pedestrian scale, and enhanced street lighting. And while a lot of that newer technology keeps light in more of a downcast format, there are instances where an abundance of it can create an excess of ambient light, and there's, I guess, leakage, if you will, and I'll talk a little bit about that more here in a minute. And this graphic here kind of shows that this is a traditional Cobra head street light. We don't have as many of these anymore, and they're using different bulb technology, as opposed to more of the LEDs as opposed to the incandescents. But here you see the area to be lit, the area that's intended to be lit by the light, and then you see the leakage and how it impacts other users. The glare zone, which kind of reflects both outward and kind of trespasses into adjacent buildings, as well as it reflecting upward. And then if you've got a cloudy sky, some of that light gets reflected back. So then you've got light reflecting off of light, and I'm not a pilot, and I know some of you up here are, but if that's the condition, you probably have a little bit of trouble actually putting eyes on what's on the ground. So that's kind of what some of the recommendations from the actual light pollution study look to kind of curb. Okay. Some more analysis from the document itself. Some recommendations, including utilizing existing documentation to kind of help mitigate the conditions that have been studied. And just some other observations of things that have kind of contributed to the conditions observed. Okay, so recommendations, adoption of, they call it an overlay district. I kind of refer to it more of in terms of what I said earlier, in terms of it being an addition to the existing military compatibility zone. You've got your accident potential zones, you've got your clear zone, you've got other areas, you've got your noise area, your noise zone or whatnot. So I see it as more of an addition in that regard instead of the creation of, say, an overlay district. This is not intended to be a zoning overlay in that sense. That's one of the recommendations. Development of lighting controls based on the model ordinance that's included as an appendix. Development of lighting controls for signage based on the pattern outdoor lighting guide, which is also an appendix in the document. And then lighting plans and audit procedures integrated into the site plan review process, some of which already exist, but it could probably be fine-tuned a bit to kind of address this specific issue. More recommendations in terms of coordinating with utility companies. So wrapping up this particular deliverable, we got feedback from the policy committee, again, back in April of last year. We also conducted a public meeting on April 5th of last year. While not highly attended, we did publicize it extensively, and the few folks who did come out were more concerned about the joint use issue that has come up recently over the past year and a half or so, but we were able to get some feedback on this, and then we continue to pump this out via the web to get more feedback and comment on people's thoughts on this. The final version of the document was delivered to us at the end of April of last year. Okay, final piece, and this one will be a lot shorter, public education and outreach program. Again, here's the issue as identified in the JLUS document, as well as the recommendation on how to address. Our purpose and intent and our deliverable, which was, of course, a document that kind of outlines some of the points of concern that the public should be concerned with, and what the partner entities in the JLUS can do to help get the word out and create that public awareness. Okay. There's the outline or table of contents of the document, 5 chapters. And so, overall, next steps when you look at this whole picture of the JLUS, pursuit of adding a light military compatibility district to the zoning code. We've already got the airport, military airport hazard district in Article 5 supplemental regulations. So one way to potentially address this would be to add something specific to the light compatibility district to supplemental regulations as well. Also working with our partner cities, Marietta and Smyrna, to consider adopting similar standards in their zoning codes if they don't already exist. Continuing to foster working relationships with the staff at Dobbins, and continuing to collaborate with our community partners, the cities, the CIDs, both Gateway and Cumberland, as well as the Chamber and the Atlanta Regional Military Affairs Council. Through all of that, of course, again, like I said at the beginning, there's a litany of recommendation or issue categories and recommended actions in the JLUS document. So, of course, there's more implementation work that could be done. And the Office of Economic Adjustment constantly has money available that they want JLUS communities to come after. So, working with our partners, with input from you all, of course, we could definitely pursue next steps in implementation by pursuing more funding from the Office of Economic Adjustment. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions from the board?
Can we have a copy of the presentation?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And presentation 4 is Eric Meyer. On transportation network company partnerships.
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, County Manager. We've been talking about this for a while. It's an idea that has been discussed nationally and discussed here in the county for the last couple of years about the possibility of us partnering with a transportation network company. So we're going to go through what is a transportation network company, talk about how that might complement public transit, case studies, flex service, transportation network partnership goals and considerations, some trip examples, and then we'll go to questions. But feel free to stop me if there's some jargon I'm using that you want explained. So what is a transportation network company? So I'm going to use Uber as an example as I go through a little bit of what they are. So most of them, all of them have an app on your smartphone, so it's one tap to ride. It's cashless payments, so folks are entering in billing information onto their phone, typically with a credit card, but many of them do also have gift card options. Clear pricing, so it usually tells you what the different trip types are going to cost you to get from A to B. Feedback and support, so if you have an issue with your trip, you can communicate that also through the app to if you had a great ride or a terrible ride and something went wrong with billing or otherwise. One provider, global coverage, so it's something folks are familiar with in many cases. So connects riders to drivers. I'm not going to go through all the details. You all have got it on your screen. Do most of y'all have probably been in a Uber or Lyft ride? Super.
You never done Uber?
So complementing public transit. This is still a field that is burgeoning with more research every year, but there have been places where they've looked at this in New York, Los Angeles, Central Florida, Caltran, also in California, to see where folks are using Uber, Lyft, or similar options to get to and from transit. And the blue lines on these maps are examples of people extending their trip from the black stations and routes that are transit on those maps. So a partnership with Uber or Lyft or some other transportation network company can dramatically help reduce costs grow ridership and reinforce a growing relationship between transit and ride sharing. So we could help fill some transit gaps, extend the reach of transit, reduce parking inefficiencies, provide financial savings, and increase transit ridership. So this is just a couple of examples of how folks have structured partnerships. Some, it's a flat subsidy, so the agency would pay a flat X dollars, and then the rider would pay the remaining. There are other places where it's a percentage of the trip, is where a public agency would enter in and pay a percentage. So also ways that can complement the transit experience is with that in-app experience, it can tell you, hey, you live in this area, you're traveling in this area, you may not be aware that you have transit nearby. If you were to use this app and get to a transit route, here's what the cost would be or the benefits, and tell you maybe a little bit more, link them over to Cobb Link's page and tell them more about the opportunities to ride transit. Nationwide partnerships, again, these are just a few. I think there's a group that tracks this nationally. I think there are about 80 such partnerships now. So these are just a few on the map. And they range from, some of them have used these partnerships, if your park and ride lot has gotten full, they'll try to explore these partnerships to get folks to the train station or park and ride lot if the parking lot's gotten full. Or maybe they're doing work on that parking lot. And so temporarily for a month while they're repaving or doing some work, they provide these benefits. Some other folks have maybe done a late shift. A lot of transit properties, their transit service dips down in the evening, so they might provide some additional Uber Lyft kind of partnerships for folks dealing with late jobs, closing the bar and heading home, closing the hotel at 11 o'clock and rotating for the night shift. So now we'll talk about flex service and how this relates. We've been running a service called Flex in the Austell, Powder Springs, and sort of Cobb Hospital area for almost 4 years now, come April. It connects to routes 30 and 25, and we operate that with a call center. So there's a little bit more of a zoom in on those 3 flex zones that we operate today. Again, we've been operating since April 2015. We use some rebranded paratransit vehicles. You call into the call center to make a request. That request has to be at least 2 hours in advance. Service days and hours are Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Right now, we see about 1,300 riders per month on average, with an average trip cost of $30 to $50 per trip. So what might we do with a TNC partnership? What kind of goals do we have in mind, considerations? So goals, increase transit system ridership. We've got 2 routes, including the Route 30, which is one of our backbone routes with 15-minute frequencies during the peaks. So how do we get folks to one of those high-quality routes like the 30 and 25? So provide first mile, last mile. That's a little bit of a understatement when we talk about some of the examples I'm going to show. We're going beyond just a mile. How do we expand the service area Flex today? When we've heard from customers, there are some folks who wish they were inside the boundary and they're not today. How do we expand the days of service to go from just Monday through Friday to more than that? Hours of service, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. hasn't worked for everybody. Folks who are trying to maybe get to an 8 o'clock job, if they're looking to get to the bus and then still get to their job, 7 o'clock start time in the morning was a little late for them. Shorten the wait time of service. Again, for Flex today, you have to call a minimum of 2 hours in advance. For some folks today and the way we live, you want it now. You don't want to wait 2 hours. You don't want to wait 30 seconds. Reduce cost per trip relative to Flex. And again, I'll go through some examples. And then just learning lessons from this innovative approach. Does it work? Who does it work for? Who doesn't it work for? So if we talk about expanding it in terms of its geography, if we look to expand it like some have for getting folks to senior centers or something like that, or getting folks to dialysis clinics, this could be an interesting way to learn about how this works or doesn't work. So geography, in the transit service plan, we've been talking to folks who use the transit in this area, including Flex, and we've talked about expanding the area from the 17 square miles it is today in those 3 zones to 42 square miles in this map. So it'd be one simplified expanded zone. So you'd have safe pickup and drop-offs to get to and from transit. We've been talking about doing all-week service, not just Monday through Friday. And we've been talking about starting earlier at 5:30 and go until 8 p.m. So that way folks can get to that first bus and get to that early job. In terms of, I guess, some other considerations, we've talked about having the shared ride only option. We're in the transit business, so on most of these apps, Uber and Lyft and others, you can choose a variety of different options with them, including from like the limousine version all the way down to the shared ride version. So if I'm going over to Chairman Boyce's house and someone else happens to be heading that way, we could theoretically get paired up. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't. The advantage to us is usually those trips cost less. So in terms of us partnering on those trips, it brings down the cost. We might set a maximum trips per month, just in case. We might set a fixed or percentage of subsidy of the total. I think in conversations we've had with a few of you, we've talked about a fixed cost. It's simpler to communicate to riders. They're used today to paying $250 to board a bus. If you tell them an Uber-Lyft partnership is going to be variable, they might find that confusing. We've talked about a phone surcharge. So if someone doesn't use the app and they still need to call in our dispatch, our call center, do we charge for that? That's a thing for debate. It's likely both the companies that are prominent in this area, Uber and Lyft, would use a promo code. So you would enter in some special code that comes out monthly to take advantage of this. We have talked about not paying, I'll be clear, not paying surge and primetime pricing. So if you've ever gone to a big event, a Braves game, otherwise, you get out of that event, you request a ride that might have cost $10 suddenly is $40, the county would cap its exposure and the rider would pay that. And finally, and I put this in red and bold, the county is obligated to provide ADA equivalent service in this area. So Uber and Lyft could possibly provide trips to and from transit for folks who are ambulatory, who don't require a Lyft-enabled vehicle. But for those folks who do, they would call back to Cobb Link. We would have a vehicle still in this area that would be responsive and go pick them up and take them where they need to go. So we do have to still provide that service for folks who have a Lyft-enabled vehicle requirement. So other considerations, marketing, how do we make sure folks know about this? The flex service, some folks have felt that the reason it's had lower ridership than we had hoped is because of lack of marketing. So we would have to make sure we address that in any possible transition. Assistance, we'd have a call center for those who do it on a smartphone. We try to help folks who are or underbanked with gift cards or some other option. We've had lots of conversations with Uber and Lyft about that. Data sharing, insurance. Nancy and I have had many conversations about insurance, and we will have more on Thursday. Driver background checks, account management, support team, all of this. These are all things folks are experimenting with in these 80 other locations. We would have our chance at that too. So let me run through cost scenario. So if we ran Monday through Saturday or Sunday, 5:30 a.m. to 8 p.m., really, right now, Uber Pool and their cost calculator shows a minimum fare of $760 for an Uber Pool ride. You've got an average fare of about $850 in the area when we sort of plugged in a bunch of options. A maximum fare for the longest trip we could sort of come up with was around $12. There's no free transfer to transit. That's sort of technically impossible at this time until we make a transition to mobile payment with the way we handle our bus system today. County would cap its trip contribution at $12. So that sort of maximum fare would be capped out so we don't get hit with surge and prime time. And then we'd probably cap monthly trips at around 60. So again, that's not a hard number. What you're trying to avoid there is you allocate so much for this partnership. You don't want 1 or 2 or 10 people using it so much to where it blows through the budget so everybody else who needs it for normal use can't. So when we plug in the number of trips and a couple different payment scenarios, if the rider paid $250 versus $1, you can see how much that stretches the budget or how much the expense goes up. Today, by comparison, our flex system runs about, like I said, 1,300 trips per month. So at most, that's around 15,000 trips per year. So this assumes far more trips handled per year, and it stays well within the current flex budget. So I want to hammer that. We've made assumptions that if we make this transition, that it won't exceed the current budgeted amount for flex. I see a
Chairman,
question.
may I ask, yeah, what's the current flex annual budget?
So we've split it up to where if we were to move this, we would have around 200 some odd thousand allocated for that ADA compliant vehicle to continue to serve in the area. And then we'd allocate around 300 some odd $1,000 for the subsidy.
You're talking about under the current, the program that you're presenting right
Right.
now? And how much are we operating under today?
It's around high 400s.
Okay. All right, so sub 500. And then this would be about, you broke it down, you said about 200 for ADA and
Around
then,
200 something for ADA and 300 something for the subsidy is what we're shooting at, with sort of that 270 to 360 number is what we think is realistic.
and you said that you would, in past conversations, essentially triple the service area? Is my
It
understanding?
goes from 17 square miles to 42, so just under
Yeah.
tripling.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Any other? Yes.
So the 3 zones that you showed us in the South Cobb area, is this looking at replacing the flex system in that area or supplementing?
It would. So these are the 3 zones we operate in today. And what we're proposing is instead of operating in just those 3 zones, have this sort of wider area.
Okay, but this would be in addition to we're already,
It would replace Flex. Flex would no longer operate.
and they have enough cars and people to do that?
Uber and Lyft, yes.
Okay. They're 2 separate companies, right?
Right. And so when we're talking about possibly putting out a request for a proposal, it would be open to any company that could do a transportation network company. So you have your Uber, Lyft, some taxi companies have apps as well and have sort of similar functionality. So certain taxi companies could also propose.
So somebody could call any one of the 3 if there are 3 that
Right.
are in that zone, that area.
If their proposals met the requirements of the RFP, then we could theoretically contract with
3,
both or more.
okay.
Now, is this something that's being done somewhere else? Because Uber made some pretty, as you know, big promises of how things were going to work at SunTrust Park, and they didn't work at all. So is this is not something that is new to them?
No.
So they do it other places?
Yes, there are about 80 such partnerships between either Uber and a transit agency or Lyft and a transit agency. And again, they vary whether they're just trying to get folks to a parking lot or helping with late shift or senior services kind of transportation.
So compared to the $30 to $50 on average trip for Flex Bus that we pay, or that we're contracted for, how would this compare if we're capping the user fee at $250? What would it be our cap, the $12?
I think we're looking at a cap of 12, but when we sort of have talked again to Uber and Lyft and sort of run some numbers with their help, I think we're looking at an average fare of $8.50. And so if we charge $1 to the rider, we would then be paying $7.50 on average versus $30 to $50.
Okay. And then what would our liability be? Or
And
are
that's-
they insured, or we insured for them, or?
They have insurance, and so these are, I would say, probably one of the reasons that these partnerships probably take as long as they do to either happen or not happen is that insurance question. And so we've had conversations with Joe Tommy's group and with Deborah's group, and we're going to meet again Thursday. So we're just giving you an update on the concept. I think there are definitely some insurance questions still. Uber and Lyft both have insurance for their riders, so when their driver is driving, the app is active. Uber's insurance is in place. Whether that insurance is enough, whether there's enough coverage for us, These are all
That's
questions
still
we have
being
to,
worked out.
we have to
But that
figure
would
out.
be identified in the RFP.
Yeah, what are we comfortable with in
Okay.
terms of risk?
No, I know, Eric, we've talked about, when we talked about this before, this is to replace Flex, but I think as part of the CTP, one of the things that you all will be looking at is potentially having this service available in other parts of the county.
I mean, while we've had Flex, we've had definitely the Kennesaw and Ackworth area have come to us on several occasions saying, could we have something like that? So I think, again, if something like this works, we find it cost effective, we don't have a lot of customer service complaints, et cetera, then it's something we definitely could explore in other parts of the county.
One other thing too, when we talk about this, because I know, and that's why you have the $1 versus the $2.50, how would it work for the transfers? Because right now, if someone rides on Flex, they don't pay again, on transferring to
I've got a-
Cobb, Link, or MARTA, right?
I've got a few examples that I know when we've gone out and talked to folks during the transit service plan, this has helped some folks. So a couple example trips going from Powder Springs Post Office near downtown Powder Springs to Wellstar Hospital, which is right there on both routes, 25 and 30. So under this scenario, the passenger would pay $1 Uber fare. We would cover the remaining $701. The total trip estimate was $801. And then if they were connecting to the 25 or 30, they would pay $250. So if they were getting over there to the Route 30 and then making their way to downtown Atlanta, they would get on the 30, go to HE Home Station to get a free transfer to downtown Atlanta.
So then the difference between what they're paying now is basically the $1.
Yes.
Because they're right now they're paying the $2.50 to get on the Flex, and then when they transfer, they're not paying again.
Right.
So in this case, the only difference would be the $1, and if they came back the other way, then the $1 coming back.
And that issue has come up. Certainly, it's $1 more than they're paying today. At a technical level, MARTA's been working on for at least 4 years, trying to do a mobile ticketing app, and they have been beta testing it. They had hoped to have that operational by the Super Bowl. Didn't quite happen. I think once that happens, there's some other transit properties like Denver recently was able to make it happen to where you could have sort of that one app to both pay for transit and for Uber. So I think that there's a roadmap to get there to where we could figure out how to make transfers more seamless and perhaps have no transfer cost. But for now, there's no way for us to avoid, to make that happen. So in this scenario, 801, passenger pays $1 for the Uber fare, $250 to get on the bus. Similar if you're going from Thread Mill Complex to the hospital, trip cost is $723. Again, they pay $1 Uber Lyft fare, and then they pay $250 to get on the bus. I really want to drive this one home. So you go from Powder Springs Post Office to Hartsfield Jackson International Airport. That's $31.01. You are going outside the zone. We pay nothing. We are not subsidizing a trip to the airport. I want to really drive that home. So we are subsidizing folks getting to and from the Route 25 and 30. We are not paying to get someone to the airport, to Perimeter Mall. It's just within that part of Cobb County. So I do want to point out, though, if someone was trying to go to the airport, they could pay the $1, get over to the Route 30, take the Route 30 to HE Homes, and then have free transfers on the rail system to get to the airport. So they pay $350 to get to the airport if they were taking transit and Uber and Lyft. So it's possible, but we're not paying $31. Questions?
That's a lot to
So what's the timeline on this?
So we're meeting again with Procurement and Legal on Thursday morning to talk mostly about the risk issues. I think we'd like to then, hear from y'all on this issue and then come before the board with a request for proposal that y'all would let us release. And then we would receive proposals, review the proposals, and then come to y'all with one contract or multiple contracts if multiple providers satisfied the terms of the RFP.
Was this part of our CCT study?
Yes,
This came out of that
yes,
recommendation?
it does.
Yeah, the only variable I'm concerned about is we got to make sure that we get way out in front of the information campaign with the seniors. A lot of them will be using the system or use Flex right now. And I just want, if there's just another $1 to their, $1 could be $100 to some of them. We just want to make sure that we explain exactly, there's always an upside and a downside to any new proposal. The upside here is we greatly expand the territory they can ride it in. And it's a lot more responsive than having to wait 2 hours. The downside is it's costing them another $1, so we need to think about that, how we're gonna talk to them, so they don't think we don't surprise them.
What's the rationale? I mean, I know you and I, we've talked about this a couple times, saying the dollar versus 250, and I mean, clearly, we just heard some of what the negative might be, but what would be the positive going 250, just the lower subsidy from the county?
Lower our exposure, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you, Eric, for your work on this. There's been a lot of discussion in District 4 about changing from flex to this type of on-demand service. And recognizably, there was a lot of work that went into creating flex to cover some of the service areas and routes that were cut during budget cuts back in 2011. For me, I really appreciate all the residents that took part in creating the flex because it did help fill a need. But because I know that there tends to be ongoing need and demand and desire for transit, the opportunity to expand our service area speaks quite loudly to me that people who need this type of service will have better opportunity to use it than the current construct today. As was discussed and with the chairman's comments, I am concerned about the additional dollar for those that have challenges making fare as it is today. I don't know what the fallout of that may be. I'm hoping that it's not going to be too great of an impediment for those that demand the service. But for those that don't have access to it, particularly those who are ADA riders who just cannot get help from the county, I'm hoping that this provides opportunity for them to be able to utilize transit and does set up a model for other areas of the county. So thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you.
And for all the other support you have from DOT and legal on this. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Any comments, questions? Okay, thank you, Eric.
thank you.
And with that, we're adjourned.